Hello, my name is Angela Sheard. I'm a curate from St Martin in the Fields, a Church of England parish church on the corner of Trafalgar Square in the heart of London. This June, I spent just over 2 weeks on placement in the Solomon Islands, travelling across the world and into a very different cultural environment. One of the things I enjoyed most about the Solomons was singing and dancing, and so I'll begin by singing a song which I learned in Solomon Pidgin. Jesus, you hold him hand long me, you take him hand long me, Abba me cry out for you. You now find every good something, long this follow all, Abba me cry out for you. Jesus, me come long, you know, you taking me this time, oh, Son Jesus, me come long, you know, you taking me this time. I stayed with three communities on Guadalcanal, the main island, the Sisters of the Church, an international community with houses around the world, and two local communities, the community of the Sisters of Melanesia and the Melanesian Brotherhood. While I stayed with each community, I tried to live their life, to join in their times of prayer, to get to know the novices and the brothers and sisters, to eat with them, to help out with the work of the community if possible, to teach the novices, and to learn songs and dances from them. It wasn't a fair cultural exchange, but when it came to teaching them dances from the UK, the best I could think of was a dance routine to S Club 7's Reach for the Stars that I learned when I was about 10 years old. In the process, I learned a little, as I said, of Solomon Pidgin, which was the language of the song that I sang just now. I saw and heard about the vibrant Castom culture, especially when I went to St. Barnabas Cathedral for the Patronal Festival. It was great to see Castom costumes, song and dance being used in worship alongside more traditional Anglican liturgy. Wherever I went, I received a wonderfully warm welcome and a generous, open invitation into people's homes and lives. The generosity of these communities, who gave so much even while they had so little, is something that has stayed with me long after I returned to the UK. It feels like a spiritual practice that is a natural extension of their lives of prayer and service in these various religious communities, and it's something that I think we can learn from here in the UK. I wonder how church communities in the UK can try to practice some of the welcome of strangers that is so interwoven into the everyday life of these communities in the Solomon Islands. What would be some of the challenges of practicing this kind of generosity in a UK context? And how might this endeavour to be more radically generous change us? How might it transform us and our church communities? There was also a great spaciousness to my placement that contrasted sharply with my life back in the UK. I stayed with religious communities, places with a shared life revolving around rhythms of prayer and work. I have heard it said that the rhythms of religious life are designed to leave a vast, open space in the middle of one's life, space within which God can dwell, and space within which we can wait expectantly for God. The focus, then, is not on the prayer or the work itself, but on the space that the life as a whole creates within us. This vast open space can be a really scary thing because, in order to create it, we have to be able to be with ourselves. But it also helps us to connect with what is really real. It helps on the way towards Evelyn Underhill's definition of mysticism, which I love, as union with reality. For me, the rhythms of all three communities in the Solomon Islands created this kind of space, but more than this, there was a kind of spaciousness within the culture as a whole in the Solomons. The pace of life was slower, people didn't seem to run around as much trying to get things done. There was a relaxed and flexible attitude to time. Fewer people had watches, and still fewer people checked them regularly. People didn't mind waiting a day or two or three to make a 2 hour journey. It just depended on when the transport was ready. Well past the point at which I would have taken advantage of delay repay schemes on the British rail network, people in the Solomon Islands just shrugged their shoulders and moved on. When another visitor from the UK asked what time one of their meetings would finish, the reply was, "Whenever we run out of things to talk about." I think that even in the Solomon Islands, though, the spaciousness of life is changing somewhat, with increasing industrialization and globalization. Smartphones were everywhere, even in the religious communities, although they were banned for the novices, and there was an obvious temptation to use them whenever there was any free time in the day. This just reinforces the idea for me that even in the Solomon Islands, this spaciousness cannot be assumed to always be there, but must be actively sought out and sustained, even in religious life. The final theme that I'd like to highlight stems from something much more difficult and something that I really wrestled with throughout my trip, but especially when I first arrived. The grinding and abject poverty which is a daily reality for these communities and for so many people in the Solomon Islands, and indeed throughout the world. Within these communities, I heard countless stories of people whose parents couldn't afford to send them to school, people who couldn't afford medication and so died of entirely preventable diseases, people who had lost multiple siblings as children to malaria, the psychological problems that still affected many as a result of the terrible conflict in the early 2000s, and much more besides. The communities I stayed with could barely afford 3 meals a day, and often lived with no electricity and no running water or sanitation. This terrible reality is a situation of grave injustice, and the need for economic and social development in the Solomon Islands is enormous. I feel strongly that the material poverty of these communities and these islands should not be romanticized or spiritualized. Over my time in the Solomon Islands, my reflections on the poverty of that country became slowly more nuanced. As I entered into the final week of my stay, I began to consider the faithfulness of these people in the midst of all the difficulties of their lives. I could see how, on one level, their life situations could cause one to doubt the goodness of God. How could God just sit by and let these people suffer in these ways? And yet, their response was very different. They knew that they needed God for absolutely everything in their lives. As a minister from Zimbabwe once said to me, "When you need food, you go to the shop. When we need food, we pray." The wisdom of these communities in knowing their need of God is something that we also need in the UK, because the reality is that despite modern healthcare and all the technologies which benefit our lives, we need God just as much. And we need our siblings in the Church of Melanesia to remind us of this in love, as we continue to nurture the precious relationship between our churches and our nations that will hopefully endure long into the future. Thank you for listening, and God bless.